We're going to be continuing in our series through the prayers of Nehemiah. We are looking at how Nehemiah prays for revival, and the series is Awaken Us, O Lord. Nehemiah prays for revival, and the title of today's message in particular, from Nehemiah 2, from verse 1 to actually verse 8, is Revival Comes with Conviction Courage. Revival comes with conviction courage. Let us read then from Nehemiah chapter 2 from verse 1. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you're not ill?" "This can be nothing but sadness of heart." I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried, so that I can rebuild it." Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, "How long will your journey take? And when will you get back?" It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, "If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so that he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy." And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, the king granted my requests. May the Lord add his blessing to our reading of his word. A man named Edward Vincent was one of the many who was touched by the revival preaching of D.L. Moody. Vincent's conversion wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And so Edward Vincent became burdened for the spiritual condition of a friend who was also a wealthy British gentleman, a Mr. Stud, who was immensely immersed in horse racing. Maybe his name was apt. He was Mr. Stud. He was involved in horse racing and gambling and in the high society of British life. So after one dinner at Mr. Stud's estate, Mr. Stud asked Edward Vincent, "Where shall we go to amuse ourselves after dinner?" And under deep conviction, Edward Vincent replied, "Let's go hear Moody preach." Stud was indignant. "It's not Sunday. Let's rather go to the theater or to a concert." But Edward Vincent stood firm in his conviction. He said, "You promise to go where I choose." And so Mr. Stud went with him to D.L. Moody's revival meeting and experienced a radical conversion on that night. He gave up gambling, he sold his horses, and he dedicated his estate to hosting gospel meetings. His transformation also impacted his family. His one son became the well-known missionary to India, China, and Africa. You'll know perhaps of C.T. Stud. And it all began with Edward Vincent's spirit-led conviction that Jesus wants to change lives. Jesus can change lives, even the lives of the least likely. And so the title of today's message is Revival Comes with Conviction Courage. Nehemiah had, we saw last time, received heartbreaking news. His people had been set free from Persia to go back to Jerusalem, but the city was still in ruins. The initial excitement of their restoration had evaporated, and now nothing was happening. The report he received said that they were living in great trouble and distress. It said that they were in disgrace. The news had brought Nehemiah to tears and then to prayer, crying out to God for mercy, confessing that it was their own fault, their own ignoring of God that had caused the mess that they were in. Nehemiah began to pray for change, a change in all their hearts, to return to God, that they would see God keep his promise to restore everybody who turns to him. We read last time that he began praying in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year of the king. And in today's passage, we read in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of the king. I come to the first point, the burden of conviction. You see, Nehemiah had been agonizing before the Lord in prayer for 4 months, from the month of Kislev to the month of Nisan. 4 months. Round about 120 days. And as he had prayed, a conviction began to grow in him. He needed to speak to his boss, who just happened to be the king of the Persian Empire. But speaking to the king out of turn could result in dismissal at best and death at worst. And the audacity of the cupbearer asking the king for anything, let alone something that was going to affect the regional politics, would probably result in death. Plus, what Nehemiah had in his heart to achieve seemed impossible to the point of craziness. So Nehemiah had prayed and prayed and prayed. Lord, show me what I must do. Is this your will or is it mine? This seems crazy, Lord. But if it's what you're doing, please show me and help me to obey you. And as Nehemiah prayed, the conviction only grew. The burden of that conviction didn't cease. It only weighed heavier upon his heart. The burden was so great that when he took wine to the king one day, even the king noticed the burden. Why does your face look so sad when you're not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart, the king asked him. Verse 2. And so now invited to speak to the king, the cork popped. He couldn't contain it any longer. And so with cautious fear, having been given this opportunity, he was at last able to speak. Verse 3. I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, may the king live forever. In other words, even if I don't, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Revival comes from a God-given burden, a God-given conviction that things can't just keep ticking over the way they are. Things cannot remain in the state that they're in. Something needs to change. And as we lean into God in brokenness, not in arrogance, in brokenness and trust, that God-given conviction will begin to grow in us until there's just no other way but to move in the direction that God wants us to go. But our King is Jesus. We've got no need to be afraid. We've got nothing to be afraid of. He wants to revive us. He wants the best for us. And so we come to the second point. After the burden of conviction, we come to the moment of courage. Because Nehemiah had now told the king what had caused his sadness, but he hadn't yet told the king what he was hoping to achieve. That still had to come, what he had been convicted to do. But even after at least one cup of wine, King Artaxerxes was quite astute. Verse 4, the king said to me, "What is it you want?" What is it you want? The king asks. And this was the moment of truth that would determine how the future unfolded from that point onwards. What is it you want? Nehemiah could either shrink back in fear and stick with what was comfortable for him, what was good for him, what suited him best. Or he could stand up in the courageous conviction that God wanted to change lives and that he'd rather be a part of that. Nehemiah understood the enormity of this God-given moment. And so before he hastily answers on behalf of himself, watch what he does. Verse 4. The king said, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. Having already sought God about change and revival, having prayed for it in hope and longed for its possibility, Nehemiah knew that this wasn't some workshopped program of revival that he had designed. He knew that this conviction was from God. But when it came to that God-given moment, Nehemiah still had to choose whether he was going to go with God or whether he was going to look after himself. It's the freedom of choice that God has given to every one of us from the very beginning. Adam had that choice in the garden. Do I go with God or do I look after myself? Noah had that choice before the flood. Abraham, before he was called to sacrifice Isaac. Jacob, when he wrestled with God, had that choice. Moses, when he was confronted at the burning bush. Esther, when Mordecai called her to step up. Job, in his terrible suffering, when he was told to curse God and die, he had that choice to make. Jonah, in the bowels of the fish. Judas, at the Last Supper. Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane. Lord, please take this cup from me, yet Not my will, but yours be done. It takes God-given conviction and God-given courage to choose against the base instinct of our fallen human nature to put ourselves first, wanting to retain control to protect our own interests. Nehemiah knew this. He had prayed 4 months for revival, but when the God-given moment of opportunity came, he still feared for his life. I was very much afraid, he said. And so, in that moment of choice, he asked God for the courage to do what God wanted him to do, rather than what was better for him. What is it that you want? And then the last point, the fragrance of revival. You see, the moment that Nehemiah made the God-glorifying choice, the whole tone of the passage changes. Verse 6. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, "How long will your journey take? And when will you get back?" It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. The king's compassion and his sympathy for Nehemiah's conviction is conveyed through that lovely comment that the queen, the symbol of gentleness and compassion and motherliness, the queen was sitting right there beside the king when he answered. Nehemiah confirms this when he adds, "It pleased the king to send me." And so now, for the first time after the longest night, the glimmer of revival begins to peak above the horizon. It may have just been the faintest of scents, but Nehemiah could now definitely smell the fragrance of revival in the air. After experiencing the brokenness, after carrying the conviction, longing for change, and having to have the courage to go with God, at last the hope of real revival had been solidified in the king's unprecedented response to help him. And so now, with the unmistakable fragrance of revival in the breeze, Nehemiah's hunger for it to become a reality was heightened. He was excited now. He could smell it. It was in the air. And he was now going to pursue revival until at last he tasted it for himself. What is it that you want? And so now Nehemiah, having smelt revival in the air, he begins to move ahead boldly in the zeal of the Lord. Because in the following 2 verses, he neatly also asks the king for a blue light brigade to get him safely back to Jerusalem. And then he asks for a requisition slip from the king to harvest all the timber he needs for the revival work from the king's forest. King was going to pay for it and get him there safely. In verse 8, Nehemiah tells us that the king granted all his requests. Why? Because the gracious hand of my God was upon me. Nehemiah knew that this fragrance of revival was of God's making. It was from God. And that because of that, God would provide everything needed for it to happen. And so now Nehemiah was all in. he was now fully committed to doing what God was going to do. Going with God. Jesus, our King, has already done everything necessary and paid dearly for it to rescue us from ruin, to make us new creations. Revival isn't just a nice optional extra for Christians. It's Christ's intention for us. He died for us to be recreated, born again, filled with His Spirit. The only question is whether revival is what we want. Do we want it? Do we really want it? The King asks, what is it you want? Do we want it? Are we willing to recognize our brokenness, our need, and our spiritual poverty? Or are we going to say, I'm okay? Are we willing to long for change? Or are we too comfortable, too set in our ways, too lethargic to be willing to change? Are we willing to press into God with heart's cry prayers until we can do no other but what God requires for revival change to happen? And when that God-given moment comes, will we retreat to where we feel safe, to what's best for us, what suits us best? Or will we have the courage to go with Jesus towards complete revival? The King asks, what is it you want? And we have the gracious hand of the Lord Jesus Christ with us to grant our request. He's already paid fully for everything. Do we have the courage to ask Him for revival?